podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Manchester United are just 1 point away from securing Champions League qualification after a 1-0 victory in sunny Bournemouth at the weekend. A bit of Brazilian brilliance from Casemiro. 2 games remain in the league, and then it's a cup final against newly crowned league champion City. The nerves set in long ago, I think. A very warm welcome to the Manchester United Weekly Podcast with me, Harry Robinson, and Jack Tate. We'll be talking about that win at Bournemouth. We'll be talking about United Women's dramatic late victory over Manchester City in the Women's Super League, where the title race is going to the final day. We'll have our patron-only Q&A in the middle of the show if you're interested in listening to that, where there's some really interesting questions that have been sent in. Then go to our Twitter at UTD Weekly Pod to find out information about how to sign up. But let's get stuck in, Jack, with the Bournemouth win. It's one of those typical end of season games where you just want to get through it. But let's start with the crowning moment. What an incredible piece of skill from Casemiro.
Yeah, unbelievable goal. As the ball was chipped in by Eriksen and then knocked down by the Bournemouth defender, I just thought it was going to drop to Neto's hands. But just the way that it sort of worked out for Casemiro, the way his body was pivoting, it just sort of worked out so well for him to kind of swing a leg at it. And yeah, brilliant finish. And it was part of a really good start to the game by United. The first 20-25 minutes I thought were really good, and that goal was thoroughly deserved. Casemiro's goals throughout the season really have been a massive bonus, which Ten Hag talked about after the game. I think, what is it now, 6 goals, maybe 7 this season, and all of them have been really, really vital. You think of the late equaliser at Chelsea, the opening goal in the Carabao Cup final, a couple against Bournemouth last time that we played them, which won us that game. You know, some really, really big goals at big occasions. Yeah,
I found it interesting as well. Ten Hag spoke afterwards. He said, we coach a lot of movement behind. Now it's coming out of the third line. It's a great run from Casemiro and a great touch from Eriksen, but it's something we've seen quite a lot with Fred going forward when Fernandes has been playing he's played in so many positions, but we're seeing McTominay a lot as well. And I think we probably saw it more from McTominay and Fred in the first half of the season. Obviously, they've played less since, so it's been less noticeable, but it's interesting that he pointed it out as not some kind of fluke run and chance encounter. It was a deliberate tactic that United were employing, and it paid off, and it required not only the quality from Casemiro but from Eriksen as well. As for the game as a whole, it's another 1-goal victory. If I remember correctly, and I'm sure I do, about 4 months ago when we were talking, or 5 and a bit actually, time has gone very quickly, when we were talking after the World Cup about what we wanted to see from United in the second half of the season, your big emphasis was on United winning games by more than 1 goal. We then had a period of doing that very successfully, and as everyone will know, it's dropped off more recently. And the problem is now the same every week. And Ten Hag said afterwards, the symbol from this season, we are not scoring so easily, but we still have scored 100 goals. He said sometimes the freshness is the problem, but I think that is one of the things we have to improve to score more easily, because that makes life easier. If you didn't have a great goalkeeper that we do, we might have conceded an equaliser. And it wasn't convincing, and we needed De Gea to step up on a few occasions. How did you assess this inability to score?
Well, so I think it's been a couple of things. You're right. We did go through a period where we actually did improve a lot in this area. I remember us talking. We said about it as we were coming back from the World Cup that this was something we should be aiming for. And then I remember a couple of months later saying, we've sort of successfully have managed to do that. We have started to win games a lot more convincingly. We're winning games by 2-3 goals, especially at home, with relative ease. Obviously coincided with Rashford's really good form. Since then, and really for me, I think the big change happened after the Carabao Cup final. It's been a couple of things. I think we went through a period where we weren't playing particularly well. Looking from the Carabao Cup final, had some pretty poor performances in there. You think about Newcastle away, obviously Brighton away, but even a little bit before that, I just think there were a number of performances where it felt like United were just quite toothless and we didn't really look like scoring. Actually, I think our form has picked up a little bit in terms of performances as of late, even if the results haven't followed, probably with the exception of the Brighton and West Ham games. I think our performances in general have been pretty good, at least for half the game. And the issue has become we aren't turning dominance into goals. You think about the first half at Tottenham, and we did score 2 goals, but really should have scored plenty more. First 25 minutes against Bournemouth, against Wolves, that should have been a much more comfortable game than it was. Even the Villa game, how many times do we get in behind, create great chances that we should have scored? There's been plenty of games recently where you feel like the performance, at least for a portion of the game, has been absolutely fine, and we haven't turned dominance into dominance on the scoreline. And I think that is probably what will frustrate Ten Hag the most.
Yeah, and we've tended to get away with it at home, where our defensive record has been better, but away from home, we've only won 8 times all season, scoring 22 goals in 19 matches. It's a really poor record. And even at home, it's been causing problems because when we've had to hold out, the pressure in those final minutes and the amount we've had to work for our victories has been excessive. And it stopped us being able to rest players and rotate as much as we would have liked. And that's kind of the more subtle problem of this, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. Like, I don't think United have been very good at seeing out games, something I've complained about a lot throughout the season. But as a top team, you shouldn't really have to be seeing out games this often. That should only be something that happens every once in a while in games where you're much more even with the opposition in terms of quality on the pitch. We've been having to see out games that we never should have been in that position in the first place. Just recently, we were really hanging on at the end against Everton, against Villa at home, against Bournemouth here, even against Wolves, even though they never really had any great chances. The last 10 minutes or so before Garnacho's goal that sealed it, it was starting to get a little bit shaky. It looked like Wolves were really going to pile on the pressure. These are situations United shouldn't even be putting themselves in. Absolutely.
You mentioned Garnacho there. I thought it was another game where the Garnacho-Sancho comparison was favoured in one way only.
Yeah, without a doubt. I think a lot of fans, and understandably, are starting to come towards the end of their tether with Sancho. I think we've defended him quite a lot, and I still think that there is a good player in there, but when you're seeing an 18-year-old come in and outperform him week in, week out, it becomes more and more difficult to imagine him being even close to first choice for United for too much longer.
Yeah, I'm still firmly of the opinion that he's worth persevering with because he's so talented, and also because, and it's a little different because these players were underperforming in a setup where kind of everyone was underperforming. But if you think about Rashford, Shaw, Dallow's another one, who have been written off, and it's not to say that, for example, with Dallow, it's not to say that now he's like a title-winning right back, but he was worth persevering with because he's provided us a good service. And in his case, he had to go out on loan. He's a bit younger when he did than Sancho is now, but only by a couple of years. But I think that the 3 combined factors of those examples in the past, particularly Rashford and Shaw, where you thought there's talent here and it needs to be worked on and we need to make the most out of it, or at least we need to do everything so that if this doesn't go well, the only person to blame is the player himself. The other factor being we know how talented Sancho is, and we've seen glimpses of that. And the third is that if United were to sell him, I don't think there's enough suitors to get a price that would be worth losing the opportunity to mould this talent into something that could be of real value to us.
Yeah, and I think the thing that's a struggle with Sancho is that there's obviously talent there. You don't put up the kind of numbers that he did at Borussia Dortmund without having some very, very obvious talent. The comparisons you made to players like Shaw and Rashford who have come in before, obviously been very talented, but not been, world beaters at various times is a valid one. But I think the difference with Sancho and what makes it more difficult to sort of have much faith in him going forward is simply that we haven't really seen that top end very much with Sancho. With Shaw and in particular Rashford. I
actually think the bigger reason that so many fans are frustrated, and this is a sense you get, or at least I get from watching at Old Trafford, the phrase "just fucking shoot" or "stop pulling out," it has become far too common. And I think
there was one actually against Bournemouth where he really, really badly pulled out of a challenge.
Yeah, and I saw a lot of comment about that, and I think it's fair because it happens too often. And I actually think that the shooting's less of the reason people are annoyed. I think just seeing that once from a player is enough for people's minds to be made up because it's a really high level, this, and you can't be doing that. And he's putting his teammates under pressure.
When the contrast to Antony is really, really stark.
And look at the difference in the reaction to them at Old Trafford as well.
Yeah, exactly.
As a result.
Antony is far from the finished article, and we talked about him quite a lot this season. But the one thing you can't say about him is that his approach to the game, his intensity in everything that he does is ever anything less than 100%. And sometimes he can go a little bit over and he can be too petulant. But I think as fans, you'd rather that than someone who at various points in the game, you're sort of unsure how up for it they are.
Yeah, absolutely.
And look, I think with Sancho, it's worth saying, as we have in the past, and I think this applies to Anthony as well, the style of wingers that they are means that they will get a lot better in a better team. Obviously, every player gets better playing in a better team, but those two in particular, their level will go up more than most because their style of play relies more on others than a more direct winger like Garnacho or Rashford. I think the thing with Sancho at the moment, though, is that you're not even sure if he's showing enough now to be in a position where he's going to be trusted to start week in, week out when United hopefully do become a better team that will suit his style of play more. Yeah,
it's a mentality thing. It's, yeah. Anyway, we have had the Sancho discussion a few times, and we could probably have a similar one with Martial, and we will speak about him a bit in the Patreon Q&A.
But I think it's a fair point, though, that especially with Garnacho coming back, like Sancho, because we've had so few options at striker, so Rashford has had to play up front a lot. Then Rashford's been injured, and with Garnacho injured, obviously Sancho was kind of nailed on starting on the left wing every week. Now I think with Garnacho coming back, you just, even in a couple of games, you know, you've really, really seen that difference already just in the directness that they offer. And I think it's going to become harder, unless we see a big difference in Sancho in pre-season at the very start of next year. I think it will become harder and harder for him to get significant minutes in this team. Yeah,
absolutely. And when you compare the discussion we've just had with, there was interesting in a good way, a positive quotes from Casemiro speaking to Andy Mitten for, I think it was in the National, about Ten Hag. And he said, he surprised me a lot with his ambition. We've been talking among us, meaning as players, and we have been saying that he's a little bit heavy because he always likes to win. He's asking for more because for him 100% isn't good enough, and he works a lot. He's very ambitious. He has the ambition to change the whole club. He's a manager who has the respect from all the players and the fans as well. Massively positive, and to hear that from Casemiro it's not going to change your opinion, is it? Because that's what we already thought anyway, but massively positive. And when you set that mentality against kind of what we've just been talking about with Sancho and those doubts about whether he can cut it, you do wonder. Casemiro also said he hasn't been enjoying his football this much for a long time, which is saying something given where he's come from. Is there any other key points from the Bournemouth game that we should talk about before we speak about United women?
I guess on the positive side, just again want to re-emphasise how good the first 20-25 minutes were. Yeah. We haven't controlled a game, particularly away from home like that, in quite a while. I don't think the counter-pressing was excellent. I was just looking on FB Ref before we recorded. We got 18 tackles in midfield in the attacking third in that game. It's the most we've had since at least the start of February. You know, this was, I think, a really good performance to start off with. Again, we let the game slip and we allowed Bournemouth back into it far too much. But away from home, I think it was a really positive sign just how dominant we were in those opening phases.
Yeah. And it says something about the way we went into this game, kind of recent form, that I think there was quite a lot of, there wasn't much confidence going into it.
No.
I think because our away form had got so bad. And this is for these final two games, and Liverpool's draw against Aston Villa helps as well, although a defeat would have obviously secured Champions League fully. So that was frustrating at the end. But it just makes these final two games, there's still a bit of pressure, which is good, because going into a cup final, we need a bit of pressure. We need that impetus to keep that momentum up. And it would be great if we can beat Chelsea, wrap things up, and then have an opportunity to rest players and get some others up to speed in case we need them off the bench in the cup final against Fulham to finish off the season. And there might be a few farewells as well, because it looks like there's going to be quite a few departures at United, or there should be quite a few departures at United in the summer.
I mean, in my head, I'd all but written off getting any more points away from home for the rest of the season.
I know, yeah.
To me, Bournemouth was almost, if we get anything from this game, it's a bonus. And obviously with us getting the 3 points and Liverpool dropping 2, it ended up being a massive result. I think the other thing, I hope we don't see Rashford again until the FA Cup final. I think it's been quite clear he hasn't been fit for the last month since he came back from injury against Sevilla, and he's obviously picked up another knock, then was ill. I just don't think there's any, as long as we get something from the Chelsea game. If we don't get something from that, obviously I think you then start him against Fulham, but as long as we secure Champions League against Chelsea, I hope we don't see him again into the FA Cup final. Give him a rest, get him fully fit for that.
Interesting, because he was just ill, so I would expect to see him play again, like, as in against Chelsea or Fulham, given it's just illness rather than an injury. It's maybe one way if he's not up to it, then yeah, you allow him that a bit more time for Chelsea, but then you give him minutes against Fulham to make sure he's got that rhythm to his game again. You can't be starting the cup final kind of finding your rhythm for the first few minutes, because how many times have we seen United concede early to City and then the game get away from us? On the subject of a Manchester derby, let's go into discussion on United women securing Champions League qualification for the very first time, taking the title race to the final day, an injury time winner over Manchester City. Also our first ever win in the WSL against City. Amazing goal from Hayley Ladd to open scoring. City then had a player sent off, their goalkeeper, but even against 10 players, they made it really hard. And in the end, it was some good subs, some impactful subs from Mark Skinner in the second half, unlike in the FA Cup final. And yeah, a great win to take the title to the final game of the season. Did you manage to watch the game? I managed to see most of it.
I did, yeah, I watched most of it.
I was very happy for Lucia Garcia, because she's been so reliable this season as a great substitute, and she's been given some opportunities from the start, but mainly as that kind of sub. I think her 7th goal of the season came in last summer from Athletic Club, and I also the goal was so good because it was a good finish, but it wasn't like an incredible goal. But what I loved about it was the 90th minute. Hannah Blundell puts in a good cross, but at the back post, Vilde Boer-Rees just perfectly heads it back across. And I thought, how many times do you see chances like that late on, wasted by players kind of panicking, heading for goal when it's just clearly not on, when the cross hasn't got enough power, so they're not, if they are going to head it on goal, it's going to be tame and the keeper catches it. And that didn't happen this time. They had the composure and the wherewithal to head it back across from Boer-Rees, and then Garcia did very well to finish it, and you could see how buzzing the players were for her, and that's always nice to see as well.
Yeah, properly good. The women's team are doing this in true kind of United fashion over the last month or so.
Yeah.
Really last gasp wins on a couple of occasions, and this, the biggest of the lot. Obviously, Chelsea still go into the final day as big favourites, but I think this not only obviously coming second, but especially the results against the sort of the big three in Chelsea, Arsenal and Man City have been massive for this team this season. Before this year, we hadn't beat any of them since coming back into the women's game. We've now beaten Arsenal and Man City.
Now it's just Chelsea
season
left.
Yeah, Chelsea is the last final frontier. We talked about it last week that, after the FA Cup final. Was that last week? Yeah. 2 weeks ago. I'm losing track.
Last week, I think.
Yeah.
Last week.
We talked about it then that that was a sign of both how far this team has come and how far is still left to go. I think you stick by that, but I think beating Man City does go some way to even just mentally making this team more aware of where they are. And it obviously secured Champions League football for the first time as well for United, which is a big deal. And again, is just another sort of marker of where this team are and the fact that we belong here. And it's not, just a one season, well, at least hopefully not a one season thing. So big deal. And I mean, there's so many players in this team that you think are massive building blocks for the next sort of 3, 4, 5 seasons. So many good performances from players that have really stepped
Maya
up.
Le Tissier, the amazing late block to deny Bonnie Shaw.
Yeah,
and that's also what I was pleased about is I was just praising Lucia Garcia. She's a recent signing. Maya Le Tissier signed last summer. Is such a talented young defender. Had a bit of an off game in the cup final, but bounced back to make that kind of match. In the end, it was still 1-1 at the time, but basically a match-winning block. Bonnie Shaw was about 6 yards out. And another recent signing, Rachel Williams, who impressed me so much. And that's kind of, when I was talking earlier about the composure, I always find watching her, and I found this in the cup semi-final against Brighton, that she came on, she scored the winner, but it wasn't just the way she scored the winner, it was you can tell some players have that experience at the top level, and it seems to rub off on the rest of the team. And Rachel Williams always seems to me like one of those who in the right moments calms things down, and at other times her work rate, it might have even been in the build up to the goal, or it was around the time when it was still 1-1 and there was kind of a loose ball coming down and everyone was going to let it bounce, and Rachel Williams just came in storming in and took the ball away and kept United possession and kept the kind of intensity to the attack up.
Nikita Parris similarly as well, coming in last season, I think added so much and has helped this team with their experience massively this year as well.
Yeah. United need to win at Liverpool. Chelsea need to lose at bottom place Reading, who themselves need victory to escape the relegation zone. So there is a chance. But yeah, Chelsea massive favourites. If Chelsea draw at Reading, United will need to win by 6 goals at Liverpool. So there is a chance. It's a small one. I guess let's just see what happens. Yeah. And Mark Skinner, I'm pleased for him because he said his father had a heart attack the day before the FA Cup final.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, I cannot imagine how that would be. But yeah, there's plenty of opinions about Mark Skinner within United Women's kind of core support. And there was some criticism of him for taking Nikita Paris off in the FA Cup final, whereas Emma Hayes' substitutions kind of changed the game in a positive way. But yeah, fair play. And yeah, tough to deal with. So I'm very pleased for him as well. It's a funny one with United Women because we've spoken about this before that, well, you can tell me what you think, but from my perspective, I'm a Manchester United fan, but I don't know, it's quite hard to put into work. Like, I'm a United fan and I'm very invested in how the women's team does. But I saw a comment from someone on the United We Stand forum after the cup final, which I thought summed it up well, that they said, it's weird coming away from Wembley being more gutted for the players than for myself. And I thought that kind of, like, I'm really invested. I want the team to do well and I'm buzzing for the players when they do well and I'm gutted for the players when they do badly. But I haven't got the same emotional attachment myself to the team, except to be a little bit buzzing when they win. Do you find a similar thing? Yeah,
definitely. I think more than the men's team feel that. I mean, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how we feel about that in 5 years, because partially,
absolutely.
Partially, I think
it's that past emotional connection, isn't it?
Yeah, well, and not only that, but also I think partially why I'm happy for the players is because this is a brand new team that is sort of been on this journey. You know, it's not as if we've been an established, very good women's team for 15, 20 years. And so in 2 ways, A, you just have more time sort of to become invested in the team. But also right now it feels almost a bit like you want these players to succeed so much because you've seen them, a lot of them anyway, kind of drag United up through, into the WSL, then from sort of a mid-table-ish team now into the Champions League spots, fighting for the title. And so, yeah, the bigger picture, obviously you want United to win these trophies, but you also feel very connected, probably more to the players than the club and the team as a whole at this point. I think I'll be interested in 5 years or so, especially once a lot of these, obviously there's been player turnover already, but in terms of the core group of players that have seen United do quite well in the WSL over 3 seasons now, there hasn't, that core group of players has remained pretty much the same. That obviously won't happen. There'll be a lot more turnover now over the next 3 or 4 years.
Also, when I think like with Rachel Williams and Nikita Paris, for example, especially Rachel Williams, who's a little bit older, it's that knowledge that they were playing in the women's game when things were really shit.
Yeah.
And the treatment of the teams and the funding was just abysmal. And so you're kind of buzzing that I think that's probably part of the reason behind it. And even for someone like Ella Toone, who's the kind of young superstar of this team, grew up in Tilsley in Greater Manchester and is number 7 for Man United, but she's very young. But even she had to leave United, leave her girlhood club to go elsewhere and then come back to the side, and didn't play in kind of this professional academy, played in regional talent centres. I wonder, will it be, because maybe it was the same when men's footballers started getting in the 50s and 60s and 70s, really, when that trend started where they started becoming a lot less similar to the people in the stands because they were earning a lot more, which I agree with. It's their right. They're very good at what they do. And the maximum wage was abolished in 64, I think. And that was the right thing to do. But I wonder whether the connection at the moment with the players feels stronger because they're very normal. They're like obviously normal people. It's interesting. I wonder what will happen.
Well, and probably also because even when United lose, you can still sort of turn around and be like, well, that was a great occasion. That's going to grow the game so much. And even the FA Cup final, you look at how many people in that stadium, they almost sold out Wembley. And you sort of turn around and you say, well, this is really disappointing for United. I'm gutted for the players. But this was still a brilliant day for women's football, and it's probably got more eyes on this game than almost any other women's game that you'll see all year. And sort of similarly in, the World Cup and the Euros, whenever England do relatively well, I think there will come a point where you probably stop.
That's obviously got to change soon, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like there will come a point where the women's game becomes established to a point where you sort of think, actually, I don't really care that this might be, very marginally growing the game. I just want to fucking win.
Yeah. Well, there's a point where it becomes patronising instead of genuine.
Yeah.
And that point's probably quite near. And I think some in the women's game would say has gone, but I don't think it quite has yet. Anyway, let's go into our Patreon Q&A and then we'll come out and be previewing the Chelsea game. Okay, just back from the Patreon Q&A with an early cup final preview. Not the most confident of discussions, but a good one nevertheless, and some interesting chats about Martial, Sabitzer, Weghorst, and if they stay, does it indicate it's been a bad summer? So if you want to hear that conversation and a bonus Q&A every week, you can sign up to be a patron. Go to our Twitter for information about how to do that. Jack, let's preview the Chelsea game. There's not loads to say about this. United need a point. Chelsea are, well, I'm laughing. United should win this game. It would be embarrassing if we can't beat this Chelsea team.
Look, we can laugh. We can laugh. Chelsea are hilariously bad. We had to deal with it last season. Facts are facts. Chelsea are terrible. Doesn't mean that United are definitely going to beat them. It means United definitely should beat them. I mean, as we kind of saw against Bournemouth, I think that game would have been much, much harder if it was 4 or 5 months ago and there was things on the line for Bournemouth to play for. I think firstly, Chelsea's fixtures at the end of the season have been horrifically difficult. They still have to play Newcastle, even after playing us. They've played City this weekend. They played Arsenal a couple of weeks ago. I think as we saw United at the end of last season, I think everyone inside that football club is pretty much checked out from the rest of this season and just want it to end as quickly as possible. So I think if you're United, start quickly. If you can get a first half goal, I think you could run away with it. Yeah.
And we should, because I'm not sure whether Ten Hag should tell the players, or say this to the players, but the players should be thinking, the team we're playing on Thursday is probably going to be a direct rival of ours next season.
Yeah.
They've been rubbish this year, but we know what Chelsea do. They have one of these bad seasons and then they recover under a new manager. Yes, it might be different this time, and I hope it is, because the things I and a lot of other people hear about what's going on inside Chelsea are pretty bad. So it might be different this time and it might not happen. But the likelihood is Chelsea will be a direct rival. United need to cause them as much psychological harm as possible and do their best to get into it. Because then next time Chelsea visit Old Trafford next year, then they'll have they'll have it on the back of their minds. I'm not confident United will do that. I think we'll win narrowly, but that's what they should be aiming to do, because it's important.
Yeah, massively. And I mean, despite all the money that I'm sure Chelsea are going to try and throw at this team over the summer, there's going to be a lot of the same players showing up at Old Trafford whenever Chelsea play there next season as well. And it should not be sniffed at one bit to be able to get something over these players. If you can go and beat them 3 or 4-0, that's going to stick with them when they show up at Old Trafford next season, even if they are a far different team at that point to what they are now. It's a chance to put a statement out there. Don't leave any doubt about United's ability to be in the Champions League. And also, third place is still there as well. And is it still the case that third means you have to go through the Champions League qualifiers?
No, the qualifiers
straight to the group stage, even if you finish fourth.
Yeah, you go straight through now.
Okay. So, I mean, there's not as much of a direct benefit, but just you want to win and you want to finish third rather than fourth.
Yeah, massively. Very much agreed. Let's hope we do it.
I mean, Newcastle play in a few hours as we're recording, so that will go some way to determining how much of a chance we have. But I think even so, I think we'd still go into the final day level on points with Newcastle, even if they win and we win. Yeah,
we just have to win. Our goal difference is very funny, so I'm just going to check how many we'd have to win by.
We have to win.
Presuming Chelsea,
I think we'd have to win by 24-ish.
Well,
if Newcastle win both of their games by 1 goal, we would then have to win our last 2 games by a combined... Well, we'd have to have a 27 goal swing.
Right.
to get past Newcastle.
Even less
Our goal
likely.
difference has finally gone into double digits though, which is lovely. It hasn't been for much of the season.
It might not be by the end of the season. Don't get too ahead of yourself. But yeah, that's even less likely than United women overturning a 6-goal deficit in the Women's Super League. That's on Saturday. United women away at Liverpool. We will talk probably a bit more about that after Thursday's game against Chelsea. And we'll talk about that game as well. And then Fulham at the weekend. And then the Cup final. As I say, we did preview the Cup final already a bit, thanks to a question from Tony Ryan in our Patreon Q&A. For our thoughts throughout the week, you can find Jack on Twitter at
UTD Tates, TAIT.
You can find me at Harry Robinson64 and the podcast itself at UTD Weekly Pod, POD at the end there. Thank you very much for listening, everyone. Thanks for giving us your time. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a brilliant week. See you soon.
Social Podcast Network.